I found myself talking about the artistic journey a lot over the past year. We all do, it seems. We talk about the journey being a long one. We talk about enjoying it versus the destination. Or in the best case scenario, we talk about finding a way to enjoy both. But I found that I seldom talk about the journey as its own thing. What is the journey, and where is it taking me? If I am supposed to care more about the journey than the destination, I would still like to know that destination, to know that this effort is leading towards something. It is, after all, one thing to enjoy the trip because you have to endure it. It is another entirely to find out that the trip was simply driving in circles for 30 years. So, I'd like to take some time to explore what the art journey is, what it means, and just at the very least begin to unpack what I think I mean and what I think most artists mean when they talk about the journey. First of all, it's a useful metaphor to talk about moving forward and growing. As creative people, we often embellish things, and we tend to like metaphor and allegory. We use stories and illustrations to talk about things, almost as if it is in our very nature, which I would reckon that it is. But let's strip it down for a moment. When we talk about the artist's journey, we are talking about the time and effort that it takes in that field to accomplish your particular goal. That goal is widely divergent for artists, and seems to change dynamically as we move through our lives. Broadly and very simply speaking, the journey is usually broken into one of the following categories, pursuing one of these potential goals. To work as a professional artist solely, to work professionally in part, to accomplish great works, or to enjoy oneself in the art. That is, of course, a great oversimplification of a very complicated topic, and most, if not all of us, have pieces of each of these categories, but I would wager that most of us have more chips on one of these than the others. So having the term art journey allows us to encompass a great many things within a single term, and yet one ubiquitous enough that most within that realm understand what we are talking about when we mention it. Thusly, the term, or the metaphor perhaps, has achieved its purpose. But I think it is more than that. I think the term journey being applied here is important. The process of learning art is not altogether similar to other endeavors. Many other tasks and skills we have to manage in our life either have far fewer pieces to master, are mastered by the greater part of the population, or do not tie into our emotions and self-worth in the same way that art does. It is a journey, partially because we need some terminology to simply explain, hey, this thing is going to take a very long time, but like driving across the country to see a national park, it is a slog sometimes, but it is worth it for the destination. However, if you hate everything about being in a car, it might not be the right journey for you. So perhaps that is why we call it a journey in the first place. I want to take a couple minutes and talk about art journeys, or rather the different kinds of them. And again, I'm speaking very broadly. I like to categorize things, and I think that we as humans generally do. It just gives us a place where we can start to have a conversation, start to gain a more full understanding of a complicated subject. So the kinds of journeys are going to start with the professional artist, the destination that so many want to arrive at. First off, we have what is likely held in the most honored position by most, the professional artist. This artist, of course, is the one who makes their living, either in whole or in large part, by making art. This is what I wanted to be in my youth, the person who makes art for a living, who gets paid to draw. In that same breath, I thought these people largely got hired to draw cool things at game companies, and that was it. Basically, draw dragons and wizards and orcs and stuff, and then get a paycheck. I would mention health benefits and PTO and things like that, but frankly, at that point where I held this mindset, I didn't even know what those things were, and I wouldn't have given it any heed. These positions, of course, exist. If you stroll down most big city streets, at some point you will find a few art galleries. In the high-end ones, you will likely find artists who sell pieces that might pay for 6 months of rent. I live in a pretty small town surrounded by several other pretty small cities. In these, it is pretty rare to see a piece of art stretch into the $5,000 range. It does happen, but it isn't common. But once, when we were in Santa Fe, we stumbled into a gallery that sold pieces for $20,000 to $30,000 a piece. And I was stunned. It was remarkable to see, to behold something like that occurring. On the other side, of course, many artists make their living as illustrators, designers, and concept artists. These, from my knowledge, are largely given prompts of some kind, sometimes very specific, sometimes more open-ended, and they have to build and iterate until their client or employer is happy with the results. When Trent Kaniga or Adam Duff or Mark Brunet talk about art jobs, these are largely what they are referring to: art industry jobs. This, at the very least, is a brief description of the professional artist, one who makes art for a living, who pays their bills by putting pen to page or brush to canvas. This is what I think many of us wanted in our youth, and perhaps many of you listening still desire this. Does this involve teaching? I've been chewing on this question as I wrote this particular script. I am going to say no for now. I think there is a fundamental difference between teaching and doing a thing. When I was teaching art, I was an art teacher, not a professional artist who was teaching. There are certainly many people who fit that title, though, but I did not. In part, I wish that had been me, that I had taken the time on the side and continued to work on my craft, to get into galleries, to do work on the side, to really continue pushing art with some oomph. So I am going to say no, from my perspective, and for this podcast at least, that teaching art is not the same as being a professional artist. There's nothing wrong with teaching, but I think at the very least it is a different thing, likely worthy of its own talking point or even its own podcast. And keep in mind, I taught art professionally for 11 years in the public schools, so I'm certainly not demeaning the position. I think it's just a different thing than what we're talking about here as we talk about a professional artist. We are talking about someone who produces art as their primary income source. So let's just add that then. Add that to the list. Art teacher. There. It's in the list now. It's its own thing, adjacent to being a professional artist. That out of the way, let's move on to the next. The pseudo-professional artist. This might be better called the hobby artist or something along those lines, but the idea is simply someone who makes a small portion of their income, or a small income, from producing art. This might be the person who sells a few commissioned pieces a year, who works at a day job and makes art on weekends and evenings, or maybe even someone who has amassed a tremendous amount of work over the years and slowly sells it off. This is often less glamorous to many younger artists, myself included in my youth. I used to think about this manner of artist as being someone who failed, someone who didn't quite make it. That perspective was invariably untrue. I was just 16 at the time. This journey for most of us is a more likely result than the pure professional artist. There is a great likelihood that many of us who pursue professional art in some capacity might find ourselves here, where art is not our sole income source, but provides something. A nice cushion or a couple date nights here and there. If you think about this in a critical way, if this seems like it isn't enough for you, I would caution you to evaluate your thinking process, as this for many professional artists is the stepping stone. Most of the people in my life who are now professional artists did not simply get a job one day in the field. They worked hard, started with a couple commissions here and there, or even worked in an adjacent field before finally managing to make that full transition. To me, this seems only logical. If you can get your feet wet with the thing before you dive in, you can test the waters, you can avoid the sharks, and you can make sure that you know how to swim before you actually get wet. I have a friend who lives up in the mountains here in Colorado who is a professional painter, and he has been for maybe 15 to 17 years. In some of the conversations that I've had with him over the years dropping by his gallery, I learned that he wasn't always a professional painter, obviously. He was a framer first. I don't remember what city he lived in, but he lived in a bigger city framing artworks and portraits and things like that for other people, and then selling his pieces on the side. I think if I remember correctly, he even started putting some of his pieces in the frames that he did at this company, and maybe even got in trouble for it at one point because he wasn't really supposed to. But it took him quite a few years of doing that, of doing a job that was adjacent to professional painting before he was able to sell enough pieces and then jump into that. And in the early years, it was pretty difficult for him. Nowadays, he makes a good living doing it, and he has a wide fan base, and he's done some really high-scale things, even in Denver, which is great. But he didn't start there, and he didn't just paint super hard, and then one day somebody walked in and went, "Ah, yes, I will now give you 6 figures to paint each year." He worked really hard in an adjacent field and continued to hone his craft until finally he kind of found his break. There is no shame and no dishonor in this kind of path. So try to think positively about it, because for most professional artists, it seems this was a step on that path. But some artists simply want to create great things, caring little for the financial ramifications as such. They simply want to make beauty in this world. Beauty that can be left or given to others, things that can be marveled at, and as is often the case, things that they can be proud of. You might be wondering, hey, can't this overlap with the prior two journeys? And you are, of course, correct. There is going to be some quantity of overlap with all of these, I think. I run into this category specifically with my writing, where, of course, I would love to publish my book at some point and have millions of people read it, but at the end of the day, I simply want to get the thing out of my head, be able to read it, share it with some people close to me, and then spend 40 years trying to get it published. The core of that project for me is to create something beautiful, something mesmerizing. There are many artists that have this as their goal. They work tirelessly on producing things of quality in their spare time, sometimes even carving away where there is no spare time to improve their skills. This manner of artist can often be confused with the last of the journeys I am talking about today, which is the artist who makes art because it simply brings them joy, because it makes their life better. These artists have little to no aspiration of selling their work. It isn't part of the equation when they sit down to create something. They think little of the investment in a piece, how many hours it takes, or what it costs to produce. These artists often appear very much alike the ones who strive for greatness, except they seldom experience the pressure, the stress, the anxiety that comes along with those high expectations. These are the artists who work for the joy, sometimes for the need of producing. This might be the healthiest group out there? I don't know, but if you are producing art because it makes you happy, because you sort through things this way, you are avoiding the financial pressures, the expectations, I don't know. It might be the happiest way to make art. So obviously that cannot be all the different types of art journeys, but I think it will at least cover our bases for now, enough to further the discussion, to move forward with some manner of inquiry, thought, discussion, and, as I often do, a dissection of our assumptions and how we approach things. If you have any more that occur to you, any more unique journeys, something I missed, something I messed up, please let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts, and I always want to improve my understanding of these emotionally charged topics. Well, what journey are you on right now? And is that one the right one for you? That might seem like a little bit of a jump, but I actually think it's the purpose of this entire discussion. If you are an artist, you are on an art journey. But do you know what kind of journey it is? Where you are heading, and whether you are driving through open plains or lava fields to get there? The destination and the trip, are they the ones you chose, or simply the ones that you fell into? This is a tough thing to answer. It requires a lot of analysis, but as artists, we have this terrible superpower of overthinking, and this, I dare say, is a wonderful place to put that superpower to use. So what journey are you on now? As I broke down the categories a few minutes ago, which one reached out to you? Which one sounded the most like what you endure, the way you think about your artistic pursuits? For me, I am just starting to work my way into that pseudo-professional sphere. I have work in a gallery, I'm looking to start selling prints, stickers, and work online, and hopefully at some point I will begin making a few dollars for my videos and art content here online. So for now, I am right on that cusp. That is my current journey. What about you? Are you trying to make it, as you might say, as an artist? Are you already bringing in a little bit of money? Or are you happy to stay where you are, produce your magnum opus over the course of the next 5 years? Or have you considered a little beyond the joy you receive by creating? Again, I feel like that might be the happiest place to reside as an artist. I think it is important to know where you are, because only then can you begin to analyze if that is the right place for you. If you might be better served by taking a look at the map and working through the backcountry to get to another trail, the one that will take you where you want to go. Is the journey that you're on right now the one that you really want to be on? Again, I'll use myself for an example here. Not because my life is any more interesting than yours or anything close to the correct path to follow, but it might at least help you sort through things a bit. When I was in high school and realized for the first time that being a professional artist was a thing, it was tantalizing. I was very excited about the possibility of getting to basically just design things, to draw and paint, and to make money doing so. I was young and naive and didn't understand much of what that would mean. Likely at the point that I learned that this position existed, I hadn't even had a job yet, so I didn't understand how working for an employer functioned. I knew a lot about the jokes people made about having bosses, but I don't think that I actually knew anything about what having a boss was like. So it's reasonable to assume that my understanding of that manner of position would have been you just get to draw and paint whatever you like or whatever is serviceable to the employer that you work for, and then you get paid for it. And that sounded pretty wonderful, as you might imagine. As I got a little bit older, I started to understand that that's not how the world works, that generally you are a cog in a greater machine, and not in a negative way, but just in a reality. You are a piece that helps achieve whatever the goal is. You know, if you work at an animation studio, you're not working anything from start to finish. You're going to be working with one component, animating lips, animating light, handling shading or texture, but one of those things is likely going to be your entire job. So I spent some time looking into animation and started thinking about, well, maybe I need to have a specific thing that I'm going to do artistically. And honestly, I got really, really intimidated by animation. It seemed like all of the other people that were getting in knew way more than me, had access to the programs that I didn't have access to. I actually went and met a professional animator, and my father was very, very kind and gracious and set this meeting up. And I think he was doing a good thing, but I left that meeting absolutely terrified. So I ended up applying just for a standard state art school. And in my naivety, again, I thought, well, I'll get an art degree with computer science, and that will somehow teach me animation. Which, of course, is not true at all, but I was young. And in that aspect, I was dumb. So I went to art school, and that over years turned into a graphic design degree, which was a much more trustworthy degree. That was additionally added to by my art education pursuits, and I ended up graduating with those 2 degrees, with a graphic design degree and an art education degree, the 2 safest art degrees you could do, which means, of course, at some point I kind of lost what journey I wanted to be on, and I ended up being on this journey of how can I make money in a field that is somehow artistic? Now, I taught for a long time. I enjoyed teaching, but it wasn't feeding the part of my soul that needed to be fed artistically. And because I wasn't paying enough attention to myself, I didn't take time in my spare time and in summers to focus on my art. I was mostly just recovering from the fatigue of teaching and spending all that time being so very social as an introvert. So that pivot was me jumping onto a different journey with a different destination, one that I didn't necessarily actively choose, but one that I just fell into either because it was safe or because it was convenient. Now, once I was aware of this, which frankly was only a couple years ago, it forced me into action. Once I knew definitively that I was not serving the part of my soul that needed to be creating, I knew that there was not going to be contentment if I didn't give in to that urge. So I ended up getting out of education, not solely because of that. There were a lot of other factors, but it has allowed me now the time to focus on my artistic endeavors. And in a lot of ways, I've learned a ton more about myself as I've started to pull back and analyze what I need as an artist. And then that honestly evolved into what I need as a human being. I would have expected it to go the other way, and I don't know that that will be what your experience is, but the more that I analyze who I am as an artist, the journey and the goal specific to me, the more I feel like I learn about myself, and the more I am a tolerable human being to all of the people around me. So that just gives you kind of a snippet and a little bit of an understanding of the journeys and goals perhaps that I desired, that I wanted to aim for, and how over the course of 20 years, I found myself on different journeys, heading towards different goals. And many of the times that happened without an active decision. I just found myself there. I would highly encourage you to do the same thing, to look at your life, to figure out what kind of artistic journey that you are on right now, and then to really assess if that's the one that you want to be on. This might take some time, and it's probably going to involve a high level of introspection, of you sitting down and really analyzing, when I was younger, what did I want? Am I still working toward that? And don't assume that the younger you knew better. It might be that the adult you does know better. It understands yourself, your world, reality, just a little bit more. And that's okay. I think what I was aiming for in my youth was not really attainable, and frankly, my artistic skill is still not in a position where I can do that. But there's also this wonderful hybridization of adult maturity, actual analysis, understanding where my skills are, where my skills can be, and then understanding that I'm a pretty cautious person by nature, so I probably don't want to do the crazy risky things, and I'm okay with things taking a long time. My journey now is only the journey that I find myself on because I took a lot of time to analyze where I was and really where I wanted to be. So I would encourage you to do the same thing. I would love to hear about it in the comments below. This, of course, moves us into our last point. In fact, I already jumped my script and started talking about it earlier, which sometimes means that the script was all right to begin with. This is what you do if there is a discordance, a difference between the journey that you're on and the journey that is right for you, the journey that you should be on or desire to be on. Now, this is going to likely take you some time to sort through, and that's okay. You should give yourself some time. You should allow yourself some grace and some kindness to really analyze and figure it out. And perhaps very importantly, don't beat yourself up if you find that the last 3 years you've been on the wrong journey. So many of us have done this, and maybe it would be relevant to be a little hard on yourself, but it's so unproductive, and we are so self-deprecating as artists sometimes that I would just caution you. Fight that desire. Be kind to yourself, and it's so much better to realize that you're on the wrong journey now at 20 or 30 than it is at 50 or 60 or 70. Wherever you are, now is the right time. This reminds me of a phrase that I've heard a lot in my life, that the correct time, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. And I think that's very true. So the best time to figure out what art journey you should be on is 10 years ago. The second best time is today. For many of us, I think we want to believe we are on the journey to becoming professional artists. And maybe we are. Expectations come into play here almost immediately. We cannot help but encounter them when we are dissecting such a large and daunting subject. So if you desire to be a professional artist and you haven't, quote unquote, made it yet, have you failed? Have you failed on that journey? Well, maybe you aren't even on the right journey right now. Maybe that desire to be a professional artist needs to be tempered. Maybe you need to bring it back to a reasonable level. I've found this with many young people that I've talked to who have this desire often right out of the gate, right out of high school, to be professional artists. They work really hard, they build their portfolio up, they post things on social media, and after 6 months to a year, they feel like they're getting no traction because they probably aren't getting any traction. And they feel like, I've failed, I'm just going to have to get a normal job now, and I'm not going to be able to be a professional artist. I think, like so many of the things that I talk about, so many of the things that we as artists deal with, this is a problem with expectations. And often in our youth, and if you are older than about 20, I'm sure that you can attest to this, often in our youth, our expectations are irrational. They're not founded on reality. This is not to be condescending to young people. It's simply that I can relay from my own life experience and from 100 other people who are older than 30 who will attest to the fact that the expectations we had for ourselves and for our lives in our youth were mostly made of straw. Some held true, but many were changed and modified as we grew older, as we learned more about ourselves, more about the people around us, as maybe you married someone or got into a relationship that was different than what you anticipated, good for you, but different than what you anticipated. all of these things, all of these factors change pieces of those childish expectations. So maybe you need to back off on being so hard on yourself, on feeling like you have to make it in a certain amount of time, or that is even the goal. If you are one of those people that cringed a little bit when I mentioned the pseudo-professional artist earlier, the person who makes a portion of their income, if that to you felt like that's giving up, I would urge you to think about that as being a reasonable alternative to working toward being a professional artist right away. If you can, after all, start to bring in $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year in commissions and professional works, that becomes a lot less daunting to jump from that to whatever your living wage is, rather than to go from zero to needing to make 30, 40, or 50 grand a year. That's pretty intimidating and reasonable for you to feel down on yourself. So consider backing off on your expectations, making sure they're realistic, still holding yourself to a high standard and holding yourself accountable, but make sure that your expectations are kind to you. Now, on the absolute opposite side, some people simply need to take the plunge. Maybe you are quite serious, doing well, making money, and afraid to take the plunge, to dive in head first, to make some risky decisions and begin that journey in earnest. Take a look at where you are and where you want to be. Are you stuck in the halfway position because this is simply all you thought you could achieve? Do you lack self-belief? Or are you just scared to move forward? We have all been there. It's so human to be scared, even when you're on the precipice of doing great things. You don't trust others. You don't trust yourself. You feel so scared, and it would be so easy to slide backward and do what you've always done. These are very natural states to find yourself. Very human. Don't beat yourself up, but maybe it's time to reassess, and maybe it's time to take that plunge, to up your prices, to offer more, to take a little time off work and produce a ton more work to sell. Please be responsible. Obviously, don't, heed this advice and go quit your day job and then yell at somebody like random internet person me about this decision. That would be very, very silly. But don't miss out on your dreams. Don't miss your journey by taking it too cautiously. Be accurate, be realistic, but throw in a dose of optimism in there. And maybe some pessimism, because I can't help but have it. But be realistic about where you are. And if you are staying away from taking the plunge because it's stressful, because it's scary, lean on some of the people in your life and see if maybe, just maybe, it's time to take the dive. Well, I suppose an art teacher has to pause for a moment and talk about teaching as well. There is a chance that you have a desire to work with or adjacent to art, but don't have all the drivers represented in the other journeys. You will likely know if you are cut out for teaching, if you have a love of the thing, a love of working alongside others, and you get joy from passing things on. For me, the most important part of teaching was helping the students to succeed, to grow, and to improve. I was less interested in their happiness, in making art for fun, for better or worse, and more focused on helping them get better, to become artists, and to taste success. In my teaching, this came from a belief that the most valuable thing for a young artist was to learn that they could be an artist, that they could grow, that they could improve. And so I was not discouraging, I was not unkind, but my chief focus was not to just make projects that were fun. My chief focus was to teach people how to paint and to draw better than they currently knew. This was far more the case with the older kids. I was not running around with 12-year-olds and throwing them through the gauntlet. But I figured if students took a class with me in high school, the goal was essentially to get good. And the thing is, it worked. I got better at not hurting kids' feelings, and I gained a reputation for having a very serious class, one where you could actually grow. At some points in my teaching career, I actually had the reputation for being the hardest class to get an A in, which I took some pride in my younger years. And as I got older, I started to realize that grades are basically all a farce, and they are simply a tool to achieve an end. And that did change a little bit of my perspective. For me, That was the most fun part of the beast, though, helping the kids to get better, to bring their ideas to life. It's probably the most difficult thing artistically. So many artists don't have a real source of encouragement in their art life. So to be that for kids and to help them actually achieve the things that they wanted to achieve was wonderful. For some of you, myself included, as you start to pull apart your psyche and understand which journey you ought to be on, you might realize that you don't need to make money with it nearly as much as you just need to make the thing. I think this was me for a long time. I know I worked as a teacher, but I always felt the need to make and to create things. I have always had stories I wanted to tell, and I lacked the ability to do so. For a time, I thought I might just have to get others to do it for me. Maybe hire them, or maybe do the writing and then pawn off the work on others. It took a long time for me to realize that I can get good enough to do what I want to do. I am still not there yet. The journey is a long one after all. But I am working on combining the need to make beautiful things with some manner of making an income at this. My ability to teach far exceeded my ability to make art. This sounds funny, but so much of teaching art comes down to having eyes that can dissect things well enough to help your students simply move one step ahead. I learned how to do this because I had wonderful teachers in college who prepared me, and because I had a ton of time invested into it. And honestly, because I failed a lot, and I didn't tolerate my failures well. I would recommit myself to the work, learn, research, talk to kids, reevaluate, and apologize where I needed to. I had a tendency to get to the beginning of every single school year, scrap the entire curriculum from the prior year, and build it from scratch, only saving the pieces that were highly successful, not the pieces that were tolerable. This was a ton of work, and I had a lot of colleagues who looked at me very strangely because they're like, well, you've taught this class for 7 years. Like, why are you rebuilding the drawing curriculum? Because it can be better. It can always be better. I have to make things. I have to create art in order to be happy and satisfied with life. But often, it's a lot of work. I do not get joy out of the act of creating much of the time, but out of the results, the conglomeration of results, the watching of a thing emerge from nothing, and the pride that comes from having a thing finished. And you might be different. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the way that I have pursued things is not special. It is simply unique to me, the human being that I am. And the reason that I share these is not because I feel like I am special and like I want empathy or sympathy in any of the cases. I simply want you to understand that we all approach these things differently. We're all different humans, and your way might be different than mine. It might be one of the ones I've mentioned here. It might be exactly the same, and your way is valid. Your way of anticipating and understanding your journey and your goal, those are important. Those are valid. That's the only reason I share the personal anecdotes. It makes it, hopefully, an easier situation for you to put yourself in that position and to start unpacking mentally where you are and what your needs are. And to watch me do it, I'm just hoping that might also help you do the same. But you might also just realize that you want to make art because art makes you happy. And if this is you, that's wonderful. I've mentioned it several times, but that might be the most wholesome, most holistic way to approach art. If you are on the journey to be a professional or to make your magnum opus and you realize that you simply enjoy making art and can dive into that wholeheartedly, please do so. In some ways, this is the most pure execution of art, to make art for the simple joy of creating. And we all should have some of this. Whatever journey you are on, if you are not encountering some of this in your creative process, then something has gone wrong. I don't think for most of us we'll be able to dedicate our entirety to this, especially if you are working in a profession that demands some creativity, because somebody higher up is going to tell you what to do. But I did once have a colleague who seemed to be able to find joy in whatever he did, joy in whatever task was assigned to him. He taught middle school science, and he was wonderful at it. But more than that, he was just a joy to work alongside because he seemed to find a way to be happy with every single thing that he did. And his life wasn't always, unicorns and rainbows. Like, things went wrong sometimes, and things were tough sometimes. But I think if that's the way that we as artists can try, desperately try to approach our art making, to find joy in whatever aspects we can, it's going to make the journey feel shorter. It's going to make the journey feel enjoyable, regardless of where you're heading on that journey. Obviously, life is not so simple as all of this. It will never quite be as simple as picking a new location on the map and changing direction. We are intricate, complicated creatures, and your individual journey is likely a weird mashup of the ones I've mentioned here and a half dozen others that I forgot. I am sure that this is the case. Well, as always, thank you for your time. I really appreciate that you sit and you listen to my rambles, and I just hope that there is some benefit to you as a listener, that you are sorting through some of the things in your mind and how you process artistically. If anything came up while I was talking about this, anything that you feel I was off or that you agree with, or anything you would like me to expand on and touch on more in further podcasts, please let me know in the comments below. If you're looking for an artistic community of some kind, we have a wonderful little Discord community, and the link for that will be in the description below. We do weekly drawings, we study particular topics each week, we do some goofy things, but mostly we're just there as a community to support one another. Give feedback where feedback is desired, and just say well done where it's not. Thank you to Patreon Who, What, Where, When for your continued support. And if you are interested in helping decide what happens in these podcasts, what random things I ramble about in the sketchbook sessions, and seeing the scripts and outlines for these things while they are still in progress, you can support the channel through Patreon at the link below. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.